So here's a standing ovation, a tip of the hats, a hip hip hooray, a toast and all that for those energy industry people. Yes, here's a standing ovation, a tip of the hats, a hip hip hooray, a toast and all that for those energy industry people.
Art Fettig has been working in the safety field most of his life. He spent 25 years investigating accidents for Grand Trunk Western Railroad, and then 10 years preventing accidents. During that period, his railroad went from one of the worst to one of the safest railroads in America. He is the father of 4 grown children and 5 grandchildren. During the Korean conflict, he served in the United States Army as a combat rifleman. He has made presentations in all 50 of the United States, in 8 Canadian provinces, and several foreign countries. The author of some 34 published books and 1,000 articles, he is currently president of Growth Unlimited, a corporation dedicated to touching people's lives. Growth just happens to be one very popular verse by our speaker. You might just recognize this voice.
Hello, Americans. This is Paul Harvey. Stand by for news.
My family chides me for the variety of my hobbies and sports and interests. That reminds me, recent weeks you and I have been comparing notes on what one lesson we have learned from life in a single sentence. Art Fettig of Battle Creek, Michigan, could not do it in a single sentence, but he did offer us a few words of prose, which he calls growth. Listen to his words, called growth. I don't ever want to be what I want to be. There's always something out there yet for me. I get a kick from living in the here and now. Yet I never want to feel I've learned the best way how. There's always one hill higher with a better view. Something waiting to be learned that I never knew. Till my life is over, never fully fill my cup. Let me keep growing up, up, up.
Oh, that's great. Great to be in beautiful Houston. And we flew down here on Continental. Absolutely perfect flight. Honest, it's so amazing. I usually fly from Kalamazoo, Michigan to Chicago on United Express. How many of you ever? They had more accidents than anybody else in town. And so I fly over Lake Michigan, and there's a lot of turbulence, and it's just one of those rides you just don't want to take, and I almost always have to take it. So the other day I got on a United Express and going into Chicago, and I'm trying to forget where I'm at. It's terrible. They don't have a flight attendant or stewardess or whatever you want. They don't have one. They got a chaplain. Something we don't know. It's so bad. When you check in, most people, they want a photo ID. They want dental records at United Express. Anyway, I try to forget what I'm doing, and I grabbed a magazine just to take my mind off this thing, and it was an old copy of Psychology Today. How many of you have ever read Psychology Today? Sure. And I'm thumbing through it. Here's an article, and I think it's pertinent to what's happening in your organization, just like many of the growing organizations in America today. They said here, with all the downsizing, how many of you have been experiencing downsizing in your life? Sure. And right-sizing and circumvention and all the things that are going on around us today, all the cutting and all the differences that are happening, the rapid changes, with the problems we're having with kids today, with the idiots out on the highway you keep hearing about driving. And I saw a guy with a bumper sticker the other day on his car, and it said, "Please forgive my driving, I'm reloading." I mean, with all the things that are happening today in America, 1 out of 3 Americans is suffering from some form of mental illness. 1 out of 3. Now, we've got a closed room here. Nobody's going to find out what happens in here. I want you to be open and honest with me. Just raise your hands. How many of you, just raise your hands, how many of you are really screwed up right now? Just raise your hands. I never saw an honest crowd like this before. Finally found the honest man after years of searching. The lantern paid off. No. Well, if somebody didn't raise your hands, let's put it this way. How many of you are sitting next to people that are really screwed up? 100%. Okay. Now, I've investigated literally thousands of accidents and hundreds of fatal accidents in my time. Then I've gone to all the corporations and gone through their records and sat with safety directors figuring out what was going on. And I've discovered that most accidents are caused by people. How many buy that? Most accidents, you know, what do you stamp it? You can put anything you want. A human error, human error, human error, human error. Somebody gets killed, you look at the report, you see what he was doing, you say, what was this guy thinking? This guy must have been nuts. And then if you really investigate like I used to spend hours extra time figuring out what really happened to that accident. Generally, there are two witnesses. Maybe they didn't see. You say, what? I say, I knew he was going to do that. Say, what did you do about it? I say, nothing. Because you can't tell him anything. I spoke at a power company in Wisconsin, in Michigan, the Wisconsin Power Company, and there was a top vice president there, and he had worked there in this little town where I was speaking before, and this guy had worked for him who had been killed 6 months before. And he said, I was sitting in Milwaukee and I read the report, and what's the first thing pops into my head? I knew he was going to do that. He said, I came over and visited and talked to other people. Everybody said the same thing. I knew he was going to do that. And he said, then I thought of myself as executive vice president, how this guy had worked for me years before when I was in charge of that place. And I said, why didn't I fire him? Why didn't I fire him? He always worked right on the brim where he was going to get hurt. Why didn't I get rid of him? I could have saved his life. I knew he was going to do that. You just can't tell some people some things. How many of you buy that? How many of you men are married? How many of you agree you cannot tell women anything? Huh? Yeah. And the women, the women agree, you know, you can't tell men anything. And young people agree you cannot tell those old fellas anything. And the old guys, you can't tell them young punks anything. And he's got more seniority. I couldn't talk to him. Or in the Army, he's a colonel. Are you kidding? You can't tell a colonel anything, especially a bird colonel. You know, and it goes on and on and on. So what happens? Everybody walks around saying, you just can't tell them anything. And you say, yeah, but wasn't that a hell of a price? I started out my safety career in February 1st, 1948. Let's see, 48, 58, 68, 78. I just had my 58th birthday, no, 68th birthday. First thing that goes is your memory, and I can't remember what the second thing is. 68 years old, and I started out when I was 18 years old, so I'm getting there. I'm getting there real quick. And it will soon be 50 full years that I've been in the safety field. Now, my job was a mail boy in Detroit, Michigan, at Grand Trunk Western Railroad. Maybe you heard of that railroad. That's where Tom Edison started his career, as selling stuff on the train and things like that. And they fired him too. So, so anyway, when I started out, I had to go to the telegraph office and pick up the wires. We had our own telegraph office. I pick up the wires, I take them to my desk, and I had 2 inkwells on my desk. This is before they invented or started using ballpoint pens. And so I had a quill, not really. I had this wooden thing I stick a nib in. You know, some of you engineers use pens like that. And I would write in a day book, in the alphabetical book, the names of all the people that had been injured that day. And then their occupation, or whether they were trespassers or crossing accident or passengers or whatever, or what their occupation as employee was, and the location. I do that with black ink. I had another inkwell with red ink, and next to some of the names I would write dead, 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 and that meant they were killed in the accident. Hardly a week would go by that I didn't get the red ink out and write dead. Now this is before we had crossing protection except at some state highways. But the regular crossings didn't have crossing protections. Some of them had crossbuck signs, few of them had bells, most of them had nothing. They didn't even have crossbuck signs. They didn't used to trim, you know, a visibility path. They had stuff growing right up to the crossings. Farmers had big families. They wanted to have 8 sons working on the farm for them. So on Sunday afternoon, they'd take the family out in the family car, a big treat, take a ride. They'd be out there, the train would be going 79 miles an hour, which was legal then. 79 miles an hour, hit the car, kill the whole family, and I'd be sitting there the next Monday morning writing dead, 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 dead. This is a normal thing for people to be killed in a crossing accident. Back then, when they were hiring, when they wanted to get some switchmen or some yard brakemen, whatever you want to call them, instead of taking psychological testing and having the personnel department, we had a personnel department. The only thing they kept track of was your name and your railroad retirement number. That's all. No data, nothing. They didn't have anything on you. That's all they had is your name. Yeah, he's an employee. You'll have to check with his boss to find anything else. It was really primitive back then. And if they wanted to hire, just pretend, this first 2 rows here, pretend this is a shanty. I left this special so I could show you. This is a shanty, and in the shanty, we have a pot-bellied stove. Here's the pot-bellied stove. It's cold out. They had what they call boomers. Boomers were railroaders that would go from town to town. They work a couple of weeks, tell the boss to shove it, get their money, go on to the next town. So you guys are all boomers. You're standing there around the hot stove. The yardmaster comes and he said, I need 2 men. Hold your hands up. Would you all you guys right here, just hold both hands up. And he would look like this here, very carefully. And if you had a couple fingers cut off, okay, if you had a couple fingers cut off, he'd hire you, because that was a sign of a seasoned brakeman. In the 30s and 20s and 30s, couplers were so unsafe that it was a normal thing for a guy to have a couple of his fingers cut off. And if I was walking through the yards or I run into a guy, I'd shake his hand, just like this here. If he had 2 fingers off right here, I'd say, how long you been braking? And he said, 30 years or something like that. It was a normal thing as I traveled around the railroad to see people with their fingers cut off. Now, in the 90s, I was hired by DuPont Corporation to speak in Kinston, North Carolina. Kinston, North Carolina. And when I went there, they had signs up, the world's safest plant. This plant had amassed the longest safety record in the world ever. They went 64,664,000 work hours without a lost time injury. That's 3,000 people working 12 years and 11 months without a lost time injury. Just picture that. Unbelievable. And what happened, a woman she was walking to her workstation, she tripped and she sprained her ankle. And it was a fatal accident. That's not true. They just bruised her up real bad. Is what really happened. But that record stood for in the 60s and 70s. Now, I go in there in the 90s, and they got a tremendous safety record. But the day before I got there, one of their workers was pulling a heavy cart behind him, pulling this heavy cart, and it's heavier than usual for some reason. It swung over and hit the guardrail. It swung back, and he had his finger a little bit too far around on the handle. And when it swung back, it just cut his finger off between the handle of the cart and the actual guardrail. Just nipped his finger right out. They took him up. They had a doctor. They have a doctor full-time at this plant, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with their lost time injuries. And this doctor worked on him, and I don't know if they sent him out or not, but the next day, he's working. They introduced me to him. He's working. But there I am. I'm talking to 3,000 people, and I said, how many of you heard about this tragic loss, this terrible accident yesterday? Everybody raised their hand. And I said, And how many of you could feel the pain? And they all raised their hand. And I said, and how many of you feel a sense of loss over what happened? And everybody raised their hand. And I said, this is weird, you know? And I said, here are 3,000 people in mourning because this guy lost his little pinky. And when I started in this business, it was a normal thing to shake hands with a guy and he'd have a couple fingers missing. Or for me to sit down at the day book and write dead, 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 dead. And that was the way facts were. How precious life has become, right? How many of you have been in service? Okay. On our side? One guy's still getting his hair cut at the base, I see. No, boy. Oh, oh well. Can't win them all. Let me ask you this. How many of you were in Vietnam? I've been doing that in every performance I've given in the last over 20 years, and it's getting better now. But used to be, the guys would come up to me all choked up and they'd say, "You're the first person to welcome me home." But people spit on me and they called me names. And God, I think you guys fought in the toughest war anybody's ever fought in, and then you come home to a much worse one. And so, thanks and welcome home. I was a combat rifleman in Korea, and in Korea, we had a kind of a stable line to fight with, and the 38th parallel when I was there, and then we had outposts out in front of the main line to, you know, to look around and stuff. And I spent most of my time fighting over these outposts, and we'd take the hill, and then the next day we'd get off of it for some reason, and we have to take it again, or they'd kick us off it. And the enemy was always right next to us, just across a little valley or something. And we were in these foxholes, and just my buddy and I, two in a hole, and we were up there. And when we had to sleep, we would flip a coin. And if I won, I would just do this. I say, "Okay, Al," I said, "I'm going to go to sleep now for 2 hours. I'm going to put my life in your hands. And you got to see I don't get bayoneted in the middle of the night. I don't want you bugging out without me. All my trust is in you." And 2 hours later, he'd kick me on the foot. I'd be down there sleeping. He'd kick me in the foot like that. And he said, "Get up, Art." And I wake up. He said, "You awake?" "Yeah." He said, "Okay, it's your turn." And he would actually put his whole life in my hands. My major purpose in life was to keep him alive for the next 2 hours. Now, when we went on an attack, he would cover my flank over here. In other words, he would look out for me on this side. I would look out for him on this side. And then we went up the hill and tried to protect each other as best we could. When I was hit by mortar fire, my buddy screamed, "Medic, medic!" And thank God he got me a medic, and they stuffed me up so that I didn't bleed to death. Now, how many would believe that I'm prejudiced in favor of the buddy system? Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm alive today because I had a buddy who looked out for me, and I looked out for him. Now, how many of you work in combat conditions today? Feels like it sometimes, doesn't it? How many of you think that maybe you have a bad hair day sometimes? Sometimes you're screwed up. You're kind of messed up in some way. How many think it would be nice to have somebody looking out for you on the job? I mean, what would it be to have everybody looking out for you and everybody looking out for each other? It's a whole different thing. And instead of saying, "I knew he was going to do that," to actually have people looking out for each other. But that's really what I'm into. What I'm really trying to do is to get people to care about each other. I had a fellow call me yesterday, day before yesterday now, from the University of Missouri. He's a professor, and he's teaching a class on safety, and he's using one of my books called Selling Safety in the 90s as a textbook. And he said, I've been in the safety field 20 years. And he said, for 20 years I've been trying to tell people that 80 to 90% of all accidents happen because of human error. And yet most companies you go to, they spend 90% of their resources chasing those other 10%. Chasing defects and chasing all this other stuff. And they walk right by the people who are getting hurt, like they were untouchable or there's no way you can get to them. Oh, they're stupid. They won't follow the rules. They don't care. And he said, when I read your book and you're talking about people, behavior, changing, you know, I don't like the word behavior modification. It sounds like you're following rats around a maze or something, but just getting people to pay attention and take care of themselves and others. They can follow an engineering thing. How many engineers do we have in the audience here? Just raise your hands. Okay, I'll talk slower. With graphics. Computerized graphics. Here they come. Are you ready? No, I get calls. When I was a claim agent, I'd get calls in the middle of the night. And whenever the phone rang, it meant there was a tragedy. They'd call me whenever there was a fatal or a really serious employee injury, like an amputation or things like that. Really horrible accidents. And one morning, about 6 a.m., I got a call, and they said, there's been a bad accident out here on US 131. You better get out here. It's a fatal. So I got in my car, and I started driving over to Schoolcraft, Michigan. And when I got there, they told me that this car had been going down this U.S. highway, and we had gates there at that time. The flashers were working, the gates were coming down, and as he approached the crossing, he saw the gates were the flashers, so he stopped and waited while the gates came down. I know you don't do that in Texas, but that's what this guy did, and it killed him. What happened is he sat there, and the train was approaching. A woman in a car going 30 miles an hour came up behind him, hit his car in the rear end, punched it right through the crossing gate, onto the crossing, just as the train arrived going 69 miles an hour. Train hit him, killed him. Train stopped, what, a quarter of a mile down the track. You know, it takes a long way to stop a train. So I take statements. I got a tape recorder on my shoulder. All the crew said the same thing. Whistle was blowing, the bell was ringing, the gates were working, the flashers, the gates came down, the guy stopped, boom, he got rear-ended, and he got killed. I talked to different witnesses. Everybody says the same thing. I got a whole stack of evidence of what happened. And somebody says, that's her over there. I said, who? That's the woman that was driving the car. So I go up on a tape recorder. I said, my name's Art Fettig, claim agent with a Grand Trunk. Will you tell me what happened? And she said, my husband is going to divorce me. I said, what? She says, my husband's going to divorce me. I said, let's try it again. My name's Art Fettig, claim agent with a Grand Trunk. Where were you going this morning? She said, I was going to see a lawyer. But when I got there, I realized it wasn't even 6 o'clock in the morning. And I said, what happened? She says, I don't know. My husband's going to divorce me. She was not even aware she was in an accident. She's walking around in a fog going, my husband's going to divorce me. How many of you have ever been that screwed up over a personal problem that you really didn't know what was happening around you? How many of you? I see some heads nodding. I've been that way many times. I have videos used by corporations all over the world. And I had a segment in one of the videos about this gal saying, my husband's going to divorce me. And this lieutenant colonel from the United States Air Force called me. And he says, I like the video. He says, but that part about that woman walking around saying, my husband's going to divorce me, he said, that's stupid. He said, nobody could ever be that wiped out by a personal problem. And if it wasn't for that, he said, I'd buy your video and recommend it, but I can't. I just don't like that segment. So 6 months later, he calls me up, and he says, you're not going to believe this, Art. He said, but I'm a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force, and I was all set up to be made colonel. Had it all made. They were going to transfer me to the Pentagon. I had a tremendous career ahead of me. And he said, the other day, I got a phone call, and I was home, and I got a phone call, and they said, number one, you're not going to make colonel. Number two, you're not going to the Pentagon. Number three, we want you out of the service within 90 days. That's called downsizing. And he said, I was in shock. He said, I've got so many bills, I need 5 more years at colonel's pay just to get even, you know. I was planning on at least 5 more years in the Air Force. They said, you're all done. He said, the next thing I know, I'm in my truck, my pickup, at the bottom of a culvert. And I have no idea how I got there. I got out of the car, walked up, climbed up. I wasn't hurt. I climbed up on the road, and I see a slick spot on the road. And evidently, I was going too fast, and I hit the spot, and I went in the ditch. And he said, I had no idea I was even driving my vehicle. I was going to work, evidently, and he said 30 minutes later, I would have been flying a jet. He said I could have been dead just like that. And right away, I thought about this woman walking around saying, my husband's going to divorce me. And he said, here I am running around saying, I'm not going to make full bird. I'm not going to be a colonel. I'm not going to the Pentagon. I got to get out of the service in 90 days. And he said, it hit me like a ton that's exactly what you were talking about. He bought the video. He showed it. He got so excited about it, he took it to Wyoming, to the military base there, missile base there in Wyoming. They asked me to come in. We made a whole series of videos for the Air Force. Many organizations, there is a proclamation issued from on high. How many of you ever heard a proclamation issued from on high? And the head monkey monk says something like this: from now on, safety is #1. Just like that. He says, put that on the bumper stickers and put the big sign, hang the banner right outside the plant so that when the guys ride in, they'll see it. From now on, safety is #1. And they come up to him, they say, but listen, we need some new safety equipment. We got to get some training for these guys. We got to put some I haven't got time for any of that. Production is important. We got to get this production now. Now, safety is #1. You understand that? Safety is #1, and that's the way it is. So what happens? The safety record gets worse. And it gets worse, and it gets worse. And right about here, it hits the fan. There's something called a significant emotional event. In companies that have great safety records, they almost always have a significant emotional event. In my life, the significant emotional event, after 25 years of being a claim agent and trying to get people to listen to me that I wanted to help out with safety and do something about it, is I got a telephone call, and one of our fireman, who was supposed to be sitting on the engine, got down to throw a switch so the crew could get done early and get home in the dark in this yard. And he thought the cars were coming down here, and they came down this. They cut off his leg here, his other leg here, and his arm here. And the next morning, I dug a hole in the ballast, and I picked up with 2 sticks, I picked up big chunks of bone and flesh, and I buried this guy, and I got sick to my stomach, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I cannot be a claim agent anymore. I don't care what happens, I can't do that anymore. And I called the vice president and told him what I wanted to do, and he gave me a new job and changed my whole life. And because of it, because of what the employees did, we went from the worst railroad and the unsafest railroad in America to the best and the safest for 10 years. That's the story of mine. That's a significant emotional event, so significant that, by God, I could not do what I was doing for 25 years any longer. Here's another significant emotional event. Just a simple one, a bread company in Chicago. Their compensation rates were $400,000 a year. They had a crummy, horrible safety record. The guy selling the insurance comes in, sits down with the president. He says, starting immediately, your workman's comp rate is $1 million a year instead of $400,000 a year. The difference of $600,000 represented the entire profit for the year. In other words, everything your company made, the guy from the insurance company was taken away. How many agree that's a significant emotional event? I mean, tremendous emotional event. Here's another one. A single mother of a 2-year-old child, 22-year-old woman, is feeding a piece of material into called a fluffer machine. This company is known worldwide by Tom Peters books and everywhere else. This is the #1 company in America when it comes to excellence and customer responsiveness. They drill this into their employees' minds. That's all they're focusing on. Excellence, excellence. She sees a piece of material going in with a crease in it. Not going to be excellent, not going to be up to the customer standard. Reaches beyond the guardrail, be on their guard to straighten that material in, is caught in the machine, dragged in the machine, and crushed to death. And they couldn't get her out. And every employee that day walked by there and saw that. How many of you agree that's a significant emotional event? The president of the company is so moved, he goes to the home, and the relatives put this little 2-year-old child on his lap. And he said, she didn't say anything, Art, but I could hear her crying out, "When's my mommy coming home?" How many of you agree that's a significant emotional event? 8 months later, this company had not brought their productivity back to where it was at the time of the accident. 8 months later, people didn't want to work on that fluffer machine. Morale stunk. 8 months later. Now, they had only attained 80% of what they had before the accident. That 20%, what's it represent? Everything, right? That's the profit, and that's what you're in business for. And how many of you agree that's a significant emotional event, not retaining your productivity? Right. What generally happens in companies when they hit this significant emotional event is they call in the engineers. Because you can engineer safety. How many of you agree? You can actually engineer safety. The ergonomists, if they had a lot of metacarpal injuries and things, you know, sure, the ergonomists, education's a powerful force in safety. Training can eliminate accidents. Each and every one of these things, equipment, getting the right safety equipment, every single one of these things work. In safety, everything works. They say, what works? Everything works. Now, most companies find that they're going after what do you call a golden goose egg. They want 0 injuries. This is their goal. And most of them find there's an invisible wall right here. And you've encountered it yourselves. Sometimes when they hit that wall, everything goes to hell. I mean, they go worse than they've ever been before, some of them. Most of them piddle around here back and forth, and they say, why is it we can't attain 0 injuries? Why? There's got to be a way to make that breakthrough. Now, I've been to some companies where they've gone 7 years. I've been to other companies. One of the companies right here in Texas that I worked with, Phillips Petroleum, one section of Phillips Petroleum has gone for 2 years. They just recently asked me if they could make a bronze thing out of our Declaration of Interdependence. You know, they wanted to hang it up, signed by all the employees. They wanted to bronze it. He says, is that a violation of your copyright? In bronze. I said, go ahead and put it in bronze. I'm thrilled. So they've achieved 2 years. But many organizations have gone year after year after year, and you stand there and you say, how can they possibly have no injuries? Part of it, well, certainly medical management helps. You know, being able to manage your people effectively and get them back to work and things like that. All those things work. However, I found one thing in common at the sites I visited where they had consistent 0 injuries time after time. And I'm going to share it with you. "13 years ago, my wife Ruthie came home from work. And she said, Art, I got a lump. And I thought she was talking about me, but she wasn't. And we went to the doctor. I said, lots of women get lumps like that. And it's probably nothing. And the doctor said, well, he did a biopsy. He said, it's malignant. You've got cancer of the breast, and I'm going to have to do a mastectomy on you. And he said, but Ruthie, he said, as long as it's not in your lymph system, we can whip this thing, and you know, you probably won't have any problems after that. You can get a prosthesis or a padded bra, and only Art will know the difference. And so they did the surgery, and it was in the lymph system. So Ruthie went through 6 months of chemotherapy in hell. And how many of you have relatives who've gone through this stuff? And she had a tough time, but then for 3 years, she was well. She didn't have any problems for 3 years, and then she came home, and when I came home from work, she was crying, and I said, what's the matter? She got another lump. And so we got in the car, we went to the best, we thought, Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. And all the doctors checked her over, and they said, you got a small lump, just a small lump, but it's malignant. So instead of a mastectomy, we'll do what we call a lumpectomy, a partial removal of the breast. And she had that, and she felt great. No more problem for 3 years. And then she came home. She hadn't been feeling good. And she said, I got another lump there. And so we went to the Cleveland Clinic, and they did a mastectomy on her again. And 2 months later, they called us in. A month later, they called us in. They said, both of you come. We want to talk to you. And we went and saw the top doctors, and they said, Ruthie's got cancer of the liver. She's got 5 spots on her liver. And I said, what's that mean? He said, that means she's in the 3rd stage of cancer, and there's no 4th stage. And I said, how long can she live? And he said, the way she is right now, he said, without chemotherapy, maybe 5 months tops. With chemotherapy, maybe longer, maybe not. Get your affairs in order. And so we started. And Ruthie went through absolute hell, just absolute hell. She lost all her hair and taken chemo. And she started to disappear. I mean, she could not eat. And she kept losing weight and losing weight. And Ruthie was a gorgeous woman. And she got down to under 100 pounds, feeling horrible. And again, talking about her in front of audiences and being on videos, a fellow from Chicago called me and he said, Art, I had a terminal illness. The doctors had no hope for me. And he said, I went to a guy who was into nutrition, a nutritionalist. And he said, he helped me and I'm well today. And my wife, he said, my mother had cancer and I sent her to him and she's well today. And I don't know if this guy can help you or not, but here's his name. Now, how many of you know when you have terminal illness in the family, there's all these quacks come out of the cracks, and they want to help you for your gross income. Whatever money you have, they'll take it all, and they're going to make miracles work. So I called this guy up. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't know the guy that had called me. And I said, Ruthie's just wasting away. She can't eat. And he said, well, I can fix that in a couple of weeks. That's no problem at all. And I said, what about the rest? And he says, maybe I can help you. And so I asked the magic question, how can I compensate you for helping me like this and being so wonderful? And he said, I don't want any of your money, Art. I just want to help her. Let's see if we can help her. That's true. I had probably 100,000 people of every denomination you can think of praying for Ruthie, because I got in front of all these audiences and people would come up and say, hey, we got a prayer group and we'll get them turned onto this. And so anyway, we had a miracle happen. And within 2 weeks, Ruthie was eating good, and she started to gain her weight back, and she started taking all these grain foods and a really weird diet, and she was cured. They did a body scan on her, and the spots on her liver had disappeared. And for a year, I said, I'm going to celebrate, Ruthie. I want to take you on vacation. And every month after that, I took Ruthie on vacation, and it was like miracle was happening. I kept getting the greatest bookings in the world, twice to Hawaii and Maui and the helicopters and Opryland and Disney World and San Antonio, Texas. We had a great time riding around that place in the mall there and had wonderful places. And then that late November, I had the honor of keynoting the Governor's Safety Conference in Spokane, Washington. And Ruthie didn't go shopping. First time. She loved to shop. And she just stayed in the room. And after that, I took her over to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, one of the most beautiful places in the world. We had a beautiful suite there, and she didn't even want to go out of the room. And I took her home, and we went to the doctor, and it was back with a vengeance now. And she had cancer of the liver. And she had cancer of the spine, cancer of the chest, cancer of the brain. Ruthie died. How many will agree that during that 10-year period, 9-year period, that there were a lot of times that I was screwed up? God knows what Ruthie went through. She went through pure hell all this time, and I was just a observer almost, you know, as her husband. But there were many, many times I need brothers and keepers. I mean, I needed help a lot of times. A lot of times I was walking around like that woman, my husband's going to divorce me. My wife is dying. My wife is hurting. And 6 months later, my step-granddaughter died in my arms of cancer, 17 years old. Now, I don't tell you these war stories for your sympathy. I've come a long way. I've just had my 4th anniversary of being single, and I got a really good life. And God is good to me. The reason I tell you is because I'm every one of you. I'm every one of you. And the guy sitting in that seat there last couple of days ago, last week, his dad was dying of cancer. A woman in the back of the row, her son had just been killed. It's every one of you, and it's not today, it'll be tomorrow or the next day. And what I'm saying is that people are screwed up. They really are screwed up because of what happened, and that's just part of life. And when they are screwed up, what do they need? They need somebody to reach out and say, hey, when they're doing something stupid, we do what we call positive interaction. And positive interaction is simply going up and say, hey, you're too good a man, we don't want to lose you. You know, would you put the helmet on, or would you do the lockout, or whatever it is. It's that simple. It's not complicated at all. But when people do that, what do? We've seen all the different programs where you go up to somebody and you hand them a slip and something, and they tell you where you can shove the slip, right? Who made you the Pope? You know, who made you the king? Well, what happens, we found, and this is one significant thing I've done in my whole life in the safety field, I discovered that when people give you permission, when they give you permission to interact with them, it's okay. And they don't have these age or discipline or seniority or sex or any of these race, and none of these barriers. They all fall down because they know the only reason I'm going to bother telling you I want you to work safely is for you, because I care about you, that's all. And I want you to care about me. It's a real simple process, that's all. And it works, that's all. In 1976, I wrote a speech. I wrote it in the year before, and I started working on it, and it caught fire. It was about the bicentennial. And because of it, they ran a couple of feature articles in Success magazine about it, and it caught on in about some 60 magazines all over America, took excerpts from it, poems and things, and there were 100 professional speakers actually wrote me and asked if they could use material from my speech. And I granted everybody. I was tickled to death. And a United States congressman got up in front of the United States Congress and read part of my speech to the Congress. And it's in the congressional record. And all of a sudden, I was hot on the lecture circuit, standing on these carts in front of these beautiful monuments and everything where they had these bicentennial celebrations. And I would talk about founding fathers. And I tried to make it a simple speech where it wasn't complicated. It was just about the founding fathers, and I tried to make them sound like human beings, just like you and me. And there's one segment in that speech where a guy comes walking in the room, and he's got a piece of paper in his hand, and just like this here, and they said, what do you got? And they really paid attention. They liked this guy. He was an engineer. We're friends again. Sure. He was an engineer. He was a certified engineer, a certified architect. He played the violin 3.5 hours a day. He spoke 3 languages fluently, successfully farmed 7,500 acres. And all of this, he wasn't yet 32 years old. A guy named Tom, and he walked in and said, what do you got, Tom? And Tom says, well, I just wrote down all the stuff we've been talking about, all the stuff we agreed on. And they said, read it. And sure enough, Thomas Edison, Thomas Jefferson, how did I do that? And sure enough, Thomas Jefferson proceeded to read something called the Declaration of Independence. And at the end of it, it said, and for the support of this declaration, calling upon divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And then he just walked over and he says, now just put your John Hancock right there. And sure enough, John Hancock signed his big name there, you know, and all the other guys signed. Now what were they signing really? They were signing their lives away, some of them. Some of them paid with their lives. Most of them were wealthy. Some of the wealthiest men in America, most of them lost their fortunes because they signed that document. Some lost their families. Some were suffered in prison, but none of them lost their sacred honor. Their signatures were sacred to them. Now, how many of you have ever signed anything? How many of you are married? How many of you remember that day? I never forget the day. I had to sign this paper, you know, and it said in Michigan, when you get married, you're actually signing half of your estate over to your spouse. And I thought, I sweated out. I said, oh, what the heck. let's shoot the whole $32. Let her ride, you know, like that. I remember closing my first house. How many of you remember closing the first house you ever bought? I remember that they had all the lawyer there and all this stuff, and I was just terrified. I looked at that mortgage I was signing. $12,000. How could I ever pay off $12,000? Now you sign 200, 300, 400,000, just like this here. The times change. When you sign something, when you make a signed personal commitment to somebody else saying, I'm going to try to look out for your life, you know, when you do something stupid and I want you to look out for my life, how many of you agree that's a pretty sacred thing, really? Really sacred stuff. Okay, I want to read to you the declaration I came up with. Instead of dependence, of independence, we made it interdependence because we're interdependent on one another. And here's what it says. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for an organization and its members to make a total, uncompromising commitment to safety for its future growth and for the good of all its employees, and whereas we do hereby resolve that we will do all in our power every moment of the day to make safety a value which we hold dear and integrate into our planning and the fulfillment of our other goals and activities. Therefore, we do hereby declare and acknowledge our dependence upon one another, for the practice of safety is both a personal and a mutual obligation. We state our commitment in this verse titled, Our Sisters and Our Brothers Keepers. And it says, we are our sisters and our brothers keepers, for safety calls for our uncompromising commitment to one another and to safety too. And it gets real personal. He says, I promise I will positively interact when I find you performing in an unsafe manner, and I expect positive interaction from you on my behalf when I go wrong. We're human, you and I, and accidents and injuries occur when we forget or just react wrongly, not doing what's right and reasonable for our own safety. We are our sisters and our brothers keepers, trusting in one another for a safer world. And I added to this, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our futures, and our sacred honor. Would you put your John Hancock right there? This means that if some private comes up to you and you're not wearing your safety helmet, then he has a responsibility to come up and tell you you don't have your helmet on. You understand that? You directors here, you understand that, don't you? Hi there. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, but what I really hope is that you have a desire to make your own personal commitment to safety. When our founding fathers signed that declaration, they laid their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor right on the line. And if you check out history, some of them lost their lives, most of them lost their fortunes, but none of them lost their sacred honor. And because of what they did, I happen to think we live in the greatest nation in the world. When you make your own personal commitment to safety, what you're saying is that you're going to look out for the other guy and that you care about the other guy. And that's what it is. And by making a commitment and by taking some action when it's called for, I honestly believe that you can make Enron one of the safest corporations in America. Thank you. Oh, man, what a great audience, I'll tell you. I've been speaking professionally for money for 25 years now. And first I set a goal. I had a dream to become a professional speaker. And I'd done a few speeches, and I was getting along in my career a little bit. And I heard about a seminar put on by a man named Cavett Roberts. And Cavett Roberts is a fantastic speaker. He lives in Phoenix. Founded the National Speakers Association, which has thousands of professional speakers belong to it now. Anyway, we went to this seminar, And I had 4 kids at the time. I didn't have any money at all. I mean, how many of you know what it's like with 4 teenagers and you're just making a minimum wage, not minimum wage, but just barely scraping by. Anyway, this conference back then, 25 years ago, cost $550 for 1.5 days. Plus, I had to drive to Chicago and stay in this fancy hotel and eat in the fancy hotel. How many of you know that cost a lot of money? I mean, back then it's like $150 a day for the hotel and stuff. And I thought I was taking this right out of my kid's mouth almost, but I was determined to become a better speaker. Well, Cabot came in for the day and a half. The first half day, he just stood there and talked like this. And I'd already seen Cabot, and I heard Cabot. And he didn't say much I hadn't heard him say before. Pretty well repeated everything I'd heard before. But for the afternoon session, there were 25 of us. The afternoon session, we each got to get up and do the best 10 minutes we had, the best 10 minutes of our speech. And they brought in a new machine that was just getting circulated then, 25 years ago, called a videotape recorder. That's common. Probably, how many of you got one right now? VCR, sure. But then it was something new. We had never seen ourselves speak. You never seen ourselves. So anyway, for the next, from 1 o'clock until almost 10 o'clock at night, one after the other, we got up to do our 10 minutes, best we could do. And they had a guy running the VCR and everything and taping us. Okay, we didn't sleep that night because the next morning, the great, our idol, Cabot Roberts, was going to critique and comment on what we'd done. Play the tape and then critique us. So picture this. We're all sitting there. We hadn't slept all night. We're so excited about this. They show the first film, the first tape, and there's no sound. The picture comes on the screen, there's no sound. So he goes and adjusts the television set and he adjusts the VCR and everything. There's no sound. They call in the technician that rented him the tape recorder. The guy says, "I'm sorry, Mr. Cabot." And he tried one tape after the other. He says, "But somehow, I don't know how you did it, but you've recorded all this tape with no sound." And Cabot just French cufflinks. How many of you know what those are with the fancy things? He always wore fancy cuff. He just tucked on each cufflink like this, and he says, "Good, good, good." Would you all say that for me? Good, good, good. Let me really hear it. Good, good, good. Just like that. And I didn't believe it. He walks around a little bit and he does it again. He tucks his thing, looks at us like this and kind of smiles and he says, "Good, good, good." And we're thinking, bad, bad, bad. Man, we $550 times 25 people, that's more than $100 altogether. They're standing there like that. We're going to want our money back because he didn't say anything the first half day anyway. And we spent all day making these VCRs and now he's showing it to us and we got no sound. And he says, just a survey, how many of you have cassette tapes, audio tapes of yourself speaking? And we all raised our hand. We all got hundreds of them. Every time you do a speech, you tape yourself so you could listen to it to try to get better. We have them stacked up all over the house. He said, "Well," he said, "you probably wouldn't learn anything from listening anyway." He said, "The biggest part of communication is how you look and what you feel deep down inside your guts. So we're going to play the tapes back and watch them. Y'all know what you said anyway, and y'all know what the other guy said. You heard it last night." So he plays them back, and he said, "I got my partner Merlin Cundiff here who wrote the book on kinesics or whatever that word is, body language," and they played the tapes back. And we watched this stuff, intensely. No noise or no sound, watching this stuff. And he said, after you watch yourself for 10 minutes up there, it was just like an open sesame, just like opening the door to understanding. Because about 75% of what we are all saying was pure BS. It was stuff we'd taken from other people here and there and other people's experiences and all that. And it wasn't from our hearts. And every one of us saw that we were cheating those audiences. And he said, a professional speaker who stands in front of an audience is just like you're naked. And the audience can see into your heart. And if you don't feel your message inside your gut, you haven't got the right to stand in front of an audience. And every one of us went home and threw out about half of the stuff we had in our speeches, and we started examining our own lives and our own conduct and what we were doing. 25 people. You know what the chances are of becoming a professional speaker and staying one? Very, very slim. Very, very few people ever make it. All of us in that room made it. Within a couple of years, there wasn't one of us making less than $100,000 a year speaking. And that's in the top 5% of the professional speakers. The biggest majority of them are still speaking. They've got good careers. You know why? Because nobody ever learns that. You got to feel it inside your gut. But the biggest thing I learned from Cabot was this business. What did he say to me? He said, good, good, good. Would you all say that for me? Good, good, good. Now, I'm a nut who collects books. I buy books. How many of you read books? I mean, I buy books. I go to the Salvation Army, the Goodwill, the library sale. I just cleaned my house, my office house. I got a separate house for an office. I just gave away 1,200 books. Just cleaning up. And I didn't touch, I mean, I got another 5,000 sitting there. Anyway, I came home from that Cabot Roberts seminar, went in the house, and here's a little stack of books, and I picked up one of them by Norman Vincent Peale. How many of you heard of Dr. Peale, a great Christian speaker, wonderful man? I've had him write a preface to one of my books. He's a fantastic guy. Anyway, I had one of his books, and the book was about blessing things and people. He said, no matter what happens, bless it. Just for instance, think about the most miserable person you ever met in your life. Can you think about him? Is he here now? No, the most miserable, and you look him in the eye and you say, I bless you for the goodness that is in you. You sure got it hidden. Like that. But you bless, and what did Cabot do? I mean, how many of you agree he was right up against the wall with no sound and all of us standing there? And he didn't plan this. This was an accident. But he has this attitude called serendipity. How many of you ever heard the word? The serendipity singers and that. Well, that came, I did some study on that. On what is serendipity? I found out there was a fable written by Horace Walpole in the 18th century. Anyway, it was about some princes who lived in the principality, in the kingdom, in other words, of Serendip. That was the name of the place that they lived, Serendip. And about once a month, these two would get sick of sitting around in their province, and they go walking out away from their province, and they would look. And whenever they found something that was a disaster of some kind, they'd take it and they'd try to turn it into something great, just like Cabot did, just like Dr. Peale's telling you to do, you know, when he's saying, hey, bless everything that happens. If a tragedy happens, bless it, you know, somehow. So then I started doing real research. I discovered one day a guy was making wallboard. Do you remember the day you were making wallboard and you put the gauges all screwed up? Did you ever screw something up like that? And you pushed the thing and you had 5 times as much pressure as you were supposed to put on this wallboard. Now, you don't know how it happened, but this thing squashed it out, just flat as a pancake, you know, really pushed this stuff together. And when you pull it out, what did they say? Would you all say it with me? Good, good. Come on, everybody. Good, good, good. No, he says masonite. Masonite was a mistake a guy made. A guy actually made a mistake, and he comes up with masonite, just like that. Well, the largest selling building material of all time was a mistake a guy made. Another guy, remember the day you were cooking soap? Cooking soap, went out with one of your 2-hour lunch hours like you take, and sure, 2-hour lunch later, let's forget to shut the soap off and the stuff's cooking, and it cooked longer than it should. He comes back, here's this darn soap floating at the top of the thing, at the top of the vat. And he looks at that, and he picks it up, and he says the magic words. Let's hear them. Good, good. No, he says that sucker is 99 and 44 100% pure. It floats. Ivory soap was actually a mistake a guy made. I come from Battle Creek, Michigan. That's where my home is. How many of you know what comes from Battle Creeks? Flakes. What'd you say?
Yankees.
Yankees. flakes. here he is, one of the flakes from Battle Creek, Michigan. No, you know, Kellogg's Corn Flakes. They were cooking some stuff in there in their kitchen. Dr. Kellogg, Dr. Harvey Kellogg, and W.K. Kellogg were cooking some stuff, and this stuff got at the top, got overcooked, and they actually scraped this thing off, and they took it and they said, good. Just like that. They said, I'll bet you we could make about $5 billion a year on that sucker. You know what? Kellogg's Corn Flakes were a mistake. They were a byproduct of a mistake. How many of you ever looked in your kitchen, in your refrigerator, and found mold on food? How many? I mean, I do it all the time. Yeah, something's moldy. My refrigerator wasn't working. I just got it fixed, but every time I reach for something, what happens? Dr. Fleming, you know, Dr. Fleming reaches in and he says, look at that sucker, penicillin. Penicillin was actually accidental, the mold, and he studied that mold and he came up with penicillin. How many of you are in the service? Many of you are probably alive today because, isn't that right? Because of penicillin. It's great stuff. Sure, a mistake some guy made. I mean, a Goodyear. Is it Goodyear who invented vulcanizing? That was a mistake. Vulcanizing was a mistake. You can go through the history of discovery time after time after time after time. What happened? Serendipity, an attitude of serendipity, the ability to take something and say, good, good, good. You know why I bring that up? You know where they get accident rules to prevent accidents, safety rules? You know where they get them? From disasters. They taught me every safety rule is written in somebody's blood. They didn't just think these things up. Every safety rule was written after a tragedy, after somebody went blind, or somebody paid with their hearing, or somebody paid with their life, or their arm, or their fingers. Every one of those safety rules is written for that. That's why when at Exxon, right here in Baytown, where I spoke a couple of years ago, they said, asking me to ignore a violation of a safety rule is asking me to change my whole value system about the value of your life. If I believe that your life is worth saving, then I have to enforce every single safety rule. And if the safety rule is stupid and no longer applies and is dumb and everything, then sound off and change it. It's just good, good, good. Would you all say that for me? Good, good, good. Just make the safety connection. And I believe that you can make Enron the goodest, the goodest energy company in the world. Thank you. Free. Yeah. How many of you are into football? I mean, Texas, my God. People crazy about football. How many of you ever played high school football? Okay. I want to tell you about our team. I played in the senior year, and our team, the varsity team, we had a 6-6 record. We lost 6 at home and we lost 6 on the road. and it was the last game of the season. I want you to just picture this. We were losing by about 3 points and just less than a minute to play. And some joker throws a firecracker out on the field and the firecracker goes off. The other team thought it was a final gun, so they went running off the field. 3 plays later, we scored on a field goal, and it was partially blocked, by the way. So sometimes even when when you get on a losing streak, you can't do anything. Actually, this is kind of rare for me to be here at Enron, because most of the time they call me into a company right after a disaster. And this is a unique situation because this is a celebration, really. Enron is celebrating excellence and safety. I mean, you're good. How many of you know that? You're good. You really are good at safety. But if you want to be a state-of-the-art corporation, which you're becoming, how many of you know this company is going like crazy? I know Enron's goal is to be the #1 energy organization in the world. How many of you know that? That's their goal. And you cannot be the #1 energy organization in the world unless you're one of the safest. That's a criteria in excellence. You have to integrate safety into every single thing you do. So, where do we go? We're here to celebrate. How many of you remember the old Rare Earth song? I just want to celebrate another day of living. How many remember that? Just want to celebrate. You won't believe this maybe, but Rare Earth has got a group. How many of you ever heard of Rare Earth? You know, a rock group and all that, and they broke up and now they're back together again. In fact, they played in Battle Creek, Michigan over the weekend here. They had a little festival and everything, and they actually had Rare Earth. And they say, I just want to celebrate another day of living. Yeah, that's what this is. This is a celebration. This organization is having a celebration that you're alive and you're alive and you're alive. And how many of you know that you have the capability of getting killed on the job? This is this industry, isn't that right? Sure, this can happen. And it hasn't, and you're celebrating. And I hope you keep on celebrating forever. That's what I hope. I'm going to tell you about a little story. This guy was careless. He didn't know what he was doing. He was out mountain climbing, and he slipped in a little landfill or something. He fell off the side of the cliff, and he fell about 100 yards and accidentally grabbed 100 feet, and he accidentally grabbed onto this limb. And he's hanging on the side of the cliff. He's going to fall to his death, and he's hanging desperately onto this thing, and he's looking up, and he's all alone. And he starts screaming, help, help, is there anybody up there? Is there anybody up there? And this voice says, yes. And he says, who's up there? Who's up there? And the voice says, God. And he says, help me, God, help me. And God says, do you believe? And he says, I believe, I believe. And God said, then let go of the branch. And he looks up there and he says, is there anybody else up there? That's an old story. Is there anybody else? I was on a program years ago with a guy named John Ralston. And John Ralston, at the time, he was a coach for the Denver Broncos. How many remember that team? Fighting team. And they had a fellow, you remember it. Floyd Little. How many remember him? Floyd Little. Running back he was. 9 years in the NFL. A legend in his own time, really. And the magic about that guy is he didn't play the whole game or anything. They just saved him for special plays. And when you had to have 2 or 3 critical yards, you know, the goal line stand and stuff like that, you just hit old Floyd on a fanny, and Floyd would go in and get you 2 or 3 critical yards. Maybe it was just inches. But somehow, that guy could run. He was a, you know, All-American 3 times. I mean, 3 years out of 4, All-American, stuff like that. The guy could run. He had crazy legs, but he had bad legs. After 9 years in the NFL, his legs were all scarred up. He had surgery almost every year on his legs. And one day, John Ralston got him aside, and he says, what's the secret? What makes Floyd Little tick? And he said, well, Coach, he said, you always put me in for the hard yardage, where it's mean. And those guys are out to hurt me. And he said, I've had so much surgery, Coach, he said, that the last time the doctor operated, he says, you got so much scar tissue now, Floyd. He says, next time you get hurt, it's going to be the last time. That's it. And he says, so every time I get into a play, just before they snap the ball, I say to myself, Floyd, this might be it. This could be your last play. You give those people something to remember Floyd Little by. Magic happens. I saw that, I thought, what a creed, what a way to work. What a way to run your life. And that's my creed as a professional speaker. Every time I go in front of an audience, I say, Art, this could be your last speech. You give them people something to remember by. I don't know how many more I got in me. I fly United Express. How many of you been on United Express? They don't have a flight attendant or stewardess, they got a chaplain. He gets on there with a holy water like this. He gets off because he knows something we don't know. So, you know how you build the greatest safety record in the world? Every single guy, every single woman, every single person, from the president and the CEO on up, you know, top man, top woman, whatever it is, to the guy that just came in, for, you know, just yesterday hired, and the new hire, if you have such things. They got to all go flat out every day. Everything, integrate safety into everything. Every decision you make has to have safety at the top of the list. That's the only way it works, flat out. You know what I believe? If every one of you, every single one of you, would make that kind of flat out effort in safety, this can be the safest energy organization in the whole world. I believe that. Yeah. Whoa. How many of you drove to work? Stupid question, right? Everybody drives constantly. I don't know what's going on. How many of you run into these idiot drivers out there? They got some of those nuts. What do they call them now? Aggressive drivers. How many of you call them aggressive drivers? call them nuts. I mean, yeah, what do you call them in Texas? I mean, a lot of stuff we can't. We're going to have a lot of beeps on this movie, I think. Yeah. Anyway, I saw a bumper sticker. They're proud of it. One of them had a bumper sticker that said, "Please excuse my driving. I'm reloading." Anyway, I've been studying safe driving for a long time, doing research on it. And over 6 years ago, about 7 years ago, I had the honor of being hired for a real celebration, a fantastic celebration. One of the companies that's known as the safest company in the world, the one that takes home all the safety awards year after year, they got their drivers together at Disney World. And the drivers brought their spouses, you know. They got to bring their spouses and fly them. It was a first-class operation. They gave us chalets at Disney World, you know, the really first-class treatment. And the reason the drivers were there, to qualify, they had to drive 1 million miles without an accident. Some of them had driven 2 million miles. One of them had driven 3 million miles. And so they got to come and celebrate, and they gave them awards and prizes and all kinds of neat stuff. And I thought, what a tremendous opportunity to talk to the safest drivers in the world. You know, the 1 million mile drivers. And so I got them in the corner one by one, and I said, what's your secret? What's the key to driving 1 million miles without... some of them had minor accidents where other people were responsible and were found responsible for running into their vehicle, but they had not had a single accident where they were in any way charged with any responsibility for it. I said, what's the secret? And one by one they said, well, we just drive, that's all, we just drive. I said, come on, you know, they're holding out on me. I said, come on, tell me the real secrets. And they said, well, we just drive. And one says, well, when I get in the cab, I leave the rest of the world outside. I mean, if I got trouble with my wife or my kids or the foreman or the dispatcher or something, I won't allow that to bother me. The minute I get in the cab, I leave all of that trouble outside the cab, and I just come in there and I just drive. Well, 6 years later, I'm driving down I-94, driving to Detroit from Battle Creek, Michigan, on Interstate Highway, and this car about, I don't know, a couple hundred yards ahead of me, that's driving in the right lane, pulls over and kind of swerves over into the left lane. Well, I was going to pass him. He was going about 65 and the speed limit was 70. I was going to pass him, and he swerves over again. And I thought, man, I got to really watch this guy in order to pass him, you know. I give him a horn. I look over. Here's a guy. He's got one of those clip charts, you know, the clip charts you write, a hardboard with a paper on it, and a calculator in his hand. He's holding on to that, and he's calculating and writing down the answers and steering with his knees. How many of you have ever steered with your knees? Sure, lots of people do. So anyway, I'm looking at this idiot, and he's doing that, and he's swerving back and forth on the highway. Well, I went past him, and I thought, oh, that's idiot, you know. And then as I'm coming into Detroit, I'm looking and people are reading the newspaper driving down the highway. Honestly, some of them have got books propped up on their steering wheel, people talking on the telephone, arguing, a man raising hell with his kids in the back seat, yelling at them like this here. And it suddenly dawned on me that people are doing everything except just driving. And what those drivers were saying is the key to safety is to just drive. Just drive. Just drive, that's all, just drive. I keep thinking about these idiots on the highway. I mean, how many of you know they're killing people? There's been reports on television. So one guy killed another guy, and they said, what did you kill him for? He says, nobody's going to give me the finger and get away with it. And so, I mean, whoever knew that giving somebody a finger was a capital offense, you know, with instant prosecution. And somebody else, he said, killed a woman. He said, well, she ran into me. She hit me. She hit me in the rear end, so I killed her. You know, this seems to be justifiable homicide if somebody gets in your way. He cut me off, so I shot him. You know, I mean, a simple thing like that. Well, I was in Atlanta not long ago with a safety expert down there. And the two of us, you know, we went driving, and he had his wife and everything. We were going out to the country there, to the beautiful hills out there, having a little vacation, a couple days. And he said, Art, he said, it was in Atlanta. How many of you ever been to Atlanta? They got that belt around Atlanta, just bumper to bunker, it seems like. And we're driving along, and there's cars flying all over around us. And he said, let me show you something. He eases up on the accelerator and slows down. And the cars start passing him, and he slows down. He said, now watch. And all of a sudden, there's no cars around us. He said, this is what I call, he says, the island of tranquility. I said, huh? He says, you can find it almost any time if you look for it. The island of tranquility. Now he said, psst, car goes by him. He just waves at me. He says, I'll pass you later. I said, what? He said, I'll pass you later. I said, what'd you say that for? He says, because, he says, I'm not going to let his driving affect me in any way, so I figure later on I'll pass him. He said, Art, what happens is there's chargers, drivers who are chargers. How many of you know they charge all the time? And somehow they all get bottlenecked up together in a crowd, all jammed together, all trying to position themselves and pass each other. They're sitting there like this here. They're all tensed up. He said, if you'll just ease up in most traffic situations and back up a little bit, you know, go the speed limit or a little bit under it, you'll back up and everybody will pass you, and all of a sudden you'll be by yourself. So I'm driving to Chicago a couple days later. I got semis all over. I'm just 3 lanes of solid semis. And I said, I'm going to try this. So I just start slowing up, and they start passing me and everything. And pretty soon, even in this tremendous traffic in Chicago, even there, I found my little island of serenity and drove around. His wife told me, he says, he's just changed absolutely since he started doing it. Takes all the tension off. And that's where all your aggressive, reckless drivers are, is up in that pack, fighting each other right at the head of that little bottleneck up there. And if you just ease up, you can get away from it. This is a paper I picked up on this flight the other day coming down here. And it says, fewer dying despite faster speed limits. Now, that's true in California. In California, they raised their speed limit to 70 miles an hour. How many of you know what, in Texas here, what's your speed limit now? 70 miles an hour. You raised yours to 70 miles an hour, and what happened? You have an increase of 14% in the death rate. Yours went up 14%, California's went down 4%. And you both did the same thing. You know what their study shows? Just an early study, but you know what it shows? In California, 86% of the drivers wear seat belts. 86%. The national average is 68%. I have no idea what it is in Texas, but I bet you one thing, I'll bet you it isn't 86%. Now here's the thing that puts the cap on the whole thing. Drivers, this is an actual study, drivers who crash, have an accident and crash at 60 miles an hour have a 50% chance of being killed. If you're in a 60 mile an hour accident and you crash, you have a 50% chance of being killed. Going 70 miles an hour, you have a 95% chance of being killed. So what's that tell me? That tells me if you're going 70 miles an hour, there's nothing wrong with going 70 miles an hour in a 70 mile an hour zone. When you have trouble is when you don't put on your seat belts. Does that make sense to you? You know, I know Texans like to be independent and all that sort of thing, but think about that. And I don't care where you're at, or anywhere in the world. It just makes sense to drive safely. I keep thinking of what those drivers told me, and I wrote a little song. Just went in the music business. And the song says, just drive, if you really want to stay alive. Just drive, if you really want to stay alive. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna do some research again. How many of you have ever taken arithmetic? Okay, about 90%. That's pretty good. I asked the executives the other day and they weren't sure, so that's great. Now, how many of you know that in doing anything, it's great if you can do it better with enthusiasm? How many of you agree to that? If you can put a little enthusiasm. What I want to combine is arithmetic and enthusiasm. And this is simple arithmetic. There's no tricks to it or anything. And I'm going to write down a number, and I want you to just call out the total, okay? You take the number 1,000, okay? Can you all see that? 1,000, you add 40. What's the total, gang? Altogether, 1,040. Altogether, 1,040. Good. I'll add 1,000. What do you got? No, 2,040. Altogether, 2,040. Okay, add 30. What's the total? Come on, let's really hear it. Enthusiasm. That's great. Okay, add 1,000. How much? 3,000. Altogether? 3,007. Add 20. How much? 3,009. Altogether? 3,009. Add 1,000. 4,009. Oh, let's hear it. 4,000. You add 10. What's the total, gang? 5,000. Come on, let's hear it. 5,000. Everybody. 4,100. Son of a gun. Pretty close. You see what enthusiasm will do for you? It's 4,090 plus 10 is how much? 4,100. Now, here's how modern education works. Modern education works today on majority rules, right? The kids all yell 5,000, must be 5,000. You know, 5,000, right. The teacher's stupid. The teacher asked the wrong questions. Should have said, what's 1,000 and 400 and 300 and 200 and 100? That adds up to 5,000. Everybody passes and we go on to glory, right? And how many of you have noticed some of the kids coming out of our education system can't read? How many of you notice? Some of them can't write. Some of them can't spell. Most of them can't add. Why? Majority rules. It's great. Majority rules. Everybody passes. But you know what we're discovering today? We can't compete in a global world We can't compete with schools. And they start testing our kids, and unfortunately, too many of them are coming way below the world average. You know, and they're saying, wait a minute, we got to get back on track. The answer was 4,100. 4,100. You know. And the question was 40 and 30 and 20 and 10. And just because everybody's screaming out the answer doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's right. How many of you ever heard of that Vincennes, that where the Navy ship shot down that plane and killed all those people because they were getting some bad data? You know, some of the computer information was wrong, and that Navy ship, the captain's there reading this information, and he says, it's a warplane, they're coming to attack us, shoot it down. And they killed, what, 180 people that day, something like that? And there's 3 guys who knew that the captain was wrong. And they just stood there silently because they were afraid of they couldn't say anything to the captain. The captain was always right. The captain was wrong. How many remember that missile that went up with that wonderful school teacher in it? Remember that? Christina McAuliffe, I think her name was. They still haven't let another civilian on one of those planes, one of those craft since then. I heard on the paper, you know, they're not gonna either because of the horrible memory. All those school kids, remember the millions of school kids watching that teacher go up? And what was wrong with that thing? It had a bad ring. And everybody knew, you know, there were not everybody, but there were all kinds of people in NASA and everywhere else knew that thing was unsafe. And there's guys running around saying, it's unsafe, and they're saying, shut up. 5,000, 5,000, 5,000. One of the greatest tragedies, 6 killed, but God, a whole mission destroyed. You know what I'm asking you to do? All you macho guys from Texas. Just when you see something like that, and there was somebody here that knew this was 4,100. Did you know that? Huh? But he didn't stand up and say, wait a minute, hold it. Yeah, you know, you say, well, I'll just shut up and go along with the crowd. And people get shot down, and planes crash, and everybody stands there and you say, geez, you know. And you know what they say? Sure, so you did yell it, didn't you? But what happens, you know, we just kind of stand back and say, geez, I don't want to embarrass that guy up there. I don't want to embarrass the boss, or he's the boss. Do you know I actually had 3-star generals signing my Declaration of Independence, making a commitment that this private can come up to me and tell me, the general, that I'm violating a safety rule, I'm doing something stupid. I don't know what happened later. But I actually had. Do you know, in this organization, I had your operation vice president in Omaha come up, the top guy in operations, come up and sign that, make a statement. If any man sees me doing something that's a violation of a safety rule, I want him to come up and tell me. That's the commitment you get from top people in this company. I hope you get that kind of commitment from each other.